Prince Alexander was only 8 years old, but he had eyes that seemed much older. While other children his age played with toys or ran around gardens, Alexander spent his time watching people. He noticed things that adults often missed. His mother, Queen Isabella, always said he had a special gift for seeing into people's hearts. The royal palace was enormous, with hundreds of rooms and countless servants, guards, and workers. Most people who lived there knew their place and followed strict rules. The prince was supposed to stay in certain areas, attend his lessons, and behave like royalty should. But Alexander was curious about everything and everyone around him. On this particular morning, the sun was shining through the tall windows of the palace corridor. Alexander had finished his mathematics lesson early and decided to explore. His tutor had fallen asleep at the desk, and the prince quietly slipped out of the classroom. He loved these moments of freedom when he could wander the palace halls without anyone telling him where to go or what to do. As he walked down a long hallway lined with beautiful paintings of his ancestors, Alexander heard something unusual. It was a soft crying sound, almost like someone trying very hard not to be heard. The prince stopped and listened carefully. The sound was coming from behind a large stone pillar near the servants' entrance. Alexander had been taught that princes should not interfere in servants' affairs, but his kind heart could not ignore someone in pain. He quietly walked toward the sound, his small feet making no noise on the marble floor. As he got closer, he could see a figure sitting on the ground, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. It was Marcus, one of the palace guards. Alexander recognized him because Marcus always smiled and nodded politely whenever the prince passed by. Marcus was a big, strong man who usually stood tall and proud in his uniform. But now he looked completely different. His face was buried in his hands and tears were streaming down his cheeks. Alexander had never seen a grown man cry before, especially not a palace guard. Guards were supposed to be brave and strong, protecting the royal family from any danger. Seeing Marcus like this made the prince feel confused and worried. He wanted to help, but he was not sure what to do. The prince stood there for several minutes watching Marcus cry. Alexander's heart felt heavy seeing this kind man in such pain. Marcus had always been gentle with the prince, even when other guards were more formal and distant. Sometimes Marcus would wink at Alexander when no one was looking, or he would tell the prince about the birds he saw in the palace gardens during his night shifts. Finally, Alexander decided he could not just stand there and do nothing. His mother had taught him that kindness was the most important quality a prince could have. She always said that true royalty meant caring for others, especially those who were hurting or in need. The prince took a deep breath and slowly approached Marcus. His small footsteps echoed softly in the corridor, and Marcus looked up with surprise and embarrassment. His eyes were red and puffy, and he quickly tried to wipe away his tears. "Your Highness," Marcus said, scrambling to stand up and bow properly. "I am sorry you had to see me like this. I should not be here. I should be at my post." Alexander looked up at the tall guard with concern in his young eyes. "Why are you crying, Marcus?" he asked in his clear, innocent voice. "Did someone hurt you?" Marcus was clearly uncomfortable being seen in such a vulnerable state by the prince. He tried to compose himself and put on his professional guard demeanor, but his voice still shook when he spoke. "It is nothing, Your Highness," Marcus said, attempting to smile. "Just some personal troubles. Nothing for you to worry about. I should return to my duties now." But Alexander could see that it was definitely something serious. The prince had learned to read people's faces and voices, and he knew that Marcus was in real pain. This was not just a small problem that would go away easily. "Please tell me what is wrong," Alexander said softly. "Maybe I can help you." Marcus looked down at the small prince with amazement. Here was a member of the royal family, someone who could have anything he wanted, offering to help a simple palace guard. Most royalty would have walked past without even noticing his distress, or they would have been angry that a servant was not at his assigned post. "Your Highness," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly, "it is very kind of you to ask, but this is not something a prince should be concerned about. It is a problem for common people like me." Alexander frowned at this response. "My mother says that all people are important, not just princes and kings," he replied firmly. "She says that a good ruler cares about everyone in the kingdom, especially those who serve and protect us." The prince's words touched Marcus deeply. He had worked at the palace for 10 years, and no member of the royal family had ever spoken to him about personal matters or shown genuine concern for his well-being. Most of them barely acknowledged his existence, treating him like a piece of furniture that happened to wear a uniform. Marcus looked around to make sure no one else was listening, then knelt down so he could speak to the prince at eye level. His decision to confide in this remarkable child would change everything, though neither of them knew it yet. "Your Highness," Marcus whispered, "my daughter is very sick. She needs medicine that costs more money than I earn in a year. The doctors say that without this treatment she might not survive the winter." Alexander's eyes widened with shock and sadness. He had never imagined that people who worked in the palace could have such serious problems. In his young mind, he thought everyone in the palace was happy and safe, just like he was. The prince felt tears starting to form in his own eyes as he thought about Marcus's daughter, whom he had never met but who was clearly very precious to this kind man. "What is your daughter's name?" Alexander asked quietly, his small hand reaching out to touch Marcus's arm in a gesture of comfort that seemed far beyond his years. "Her name is Emma," Marcus replied, his voice filled with both love and desperation. "She is 7 years old, just a year younger than you, Your Highness. She loves to draw pictures of flowers and birds, even though she is too weak to go outside and see them anymore." The prince listened intently as Marcus continued to speak about his daughter. Emma lived in a small house in the village outside the palace walls with her grandmother. Marcus's wife had died when Emma was born, and he had been raising her alone while working at the palace. For the past few months, Emma had been getting sicker and sicker, coughing constantly and struggling to breathe. "The village doctor says her lungs are damaged," Marcus explained, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "There is a new medicine from the capital city that could help her, but it costs more gold coins than I could save in 5 years. I have been working extra shifts, taking on additional duties, but it is not enough." Alexander felt a burning sensation in his chest as he imagined a little girl his own age lying sick in bed, unable to play or enjoy life like he did every day. He thought about his own comfortable bedroom with its warm fireplace, his collection of books and toys, and the palace doctors who came immediately whenever he had even the smallest cough or fever. "Have you asked the king for help?" Alexander asked innocently, not yet understanding the complex social barriers that existed between royalty and servants. Marcus smiled sadly at the prince's suggestion. "Your Highness, guards like me do not speak directly to the king about personal matters. There are protocols and procedures. I am grateful to have this job at the palace, and I cannot risk losing it by bothering His Majesty with my problems." The prince looked confused by this explanation. In his young mind, his father was a kind man who would surely want to help a sick child. Alexander did not understand why there would be rules preventing someone from asking for help when their daughter was dying. "But you protect us every day," Alexander said, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "You stand guard in the rain and snow, and you keep us safe from danger. Why would my father not want to help you when you need it?" Marcus was touched by the prince's logic, but he knew the reality of palace life was much more complicated than the child understood. "Your Highness, the king has many responsibilities and cannot be concerned with every servant's personal troubles. There are hundreds of people who work in the palace, and if everyone brought their problems to the king, he would have no time for ruling the kingdom." Alexander fell silent, thinking carefully about what Marcus had said. The prince was young, but he was intelligent and had been taught about fairness and justice in his lessons. Something about this situation seemed very wrong to him, though he could not quite put his finger on what it was. "Tell me more about Emma," Alexander said finally. "What does she like to do when she is feeling well enough?" Marcus's face brightened slightly as he talked about his daughter's personality. Despite her illness, Emma remained cheerful and curious about the world around her. She loved stories, especially tales about brave knights and magical adventures. She dreamed of one day visiting the palace and seeing the beautiful gardens that her father described to her. "She asks me every day about the prince," Marcus said with a small smile. "She wants to know if you are kind and if you like to play games. I always tell her that you seem like a very good boy, even though I have never actually spoken with you before today." Alexander felt a warm feeling in his heart, knowing that somewhere in the village, a little girl was curious about him and thought of him as a friend she had never met. "I would like to meet Emma someday," he said sincerely. "Maybe when she is feeling better, she could visit the palace gardens." Marcus looked surprised by this suggestion. That is very kind of you to say, Your Highness, but servants' children are not allowed in the palace grounds. It is against the rules. Again, Alexander felt frustrated by these mysterious rules that seemed to prevent good things from happening. Who made these rules, he asked. Could they be changed? The rules have existed for many years, Marcus explained patiently. They help maintain order and security in the palace. Your father and his advisors believe they are necessary to protect the royal family. Alexander nodded, though he still did not fully understand. He was beginning to realize that the world was much more complicated than he had previously thought. There were invisible barriers between people that had nothing to do with whether they were good or bad, kind or cruel. How much does the medicine cost? The prince asked suddenly. Marcus hesitated before answering. 200 gold coins, Your Highness. It is more money than most people in the village will see in their entire lives. To Alexander, this number meant very little. He had no real understanding of money or its value. In his experience, when he wanted something, it simply appeared. When he was hungry, food was brought to him. When he needed new clothes, the royal tailor made them. The concept of not having enough money to buy something important was completely foreign to him. Could you not just go to the royal treasury and get the gold coins? Alexander asked innocently. Marcus could not help but smile at the prince's naive question. Your Highness, the royal treasury belongs to the kingdom, not to individual guards. I cannot simply take money from it, even for something important like my daughter's medicine. That would be stealing, and I would be thrown in the dungeon or worse. The prince's face fell as he began to understand the impossible situation Marcus was facing. The man needed something to save his daughter's life, but he had no way to get it without breaking laws that would result in severe punishment. Alexander felt a determination growing inside him that he had never experienced before. This was not just a sad story he was hearing. This was a real problem that needed a real solution. For the first time in his young life, the prince felt the weight of responsibility that came with his position and privilege. I will help you, Alexander declared with the serious tone of someone making a solemn promise. Emma will get her medicine. Marcus looked at the determined little prince with a mixture of gratitude and concern. Your Highness, I appreciate your kind heart more than you could ever know. But this is not something a child can solve, even a prince. The world does not work that way. But Alexander was not discouraged by Marcus's words. In his young mind, problems existed to be solved, and he was a prince with resources and influence that he had never thought to use before. You do not understand, he said confidently. I am going to talk to my father about this right now. Your Highness, please, Marcus said urgently, grabbing the prince's arm gently to stop him from leaving. You must not mention this to the king. If he discovers that I have been discussing my personal problems with you, I could lose my job. Then I would have no money at all to help Emma, and she would surely die. Alexander paused, realizing that his first instinct might actually make things worse for Marcus and Emma. The prince was learning that good intentions were not always enough. He needed to think carefully about the consequences of his actions. Then what should I do? Alexander asked, feeling frustrated by his helplessness despite his royal status. Marcus knelt down again and looked directly into the prince's eyes. Your Highness, just knowing that you care means more to me than you could imagine. Most people in your position would never notice the troubles of someone like me. The fact that you listened and showed kindness gives me strength to keep trying. But Alexander was not satisfied with simply providing emotional support. He had been raised to believe that with great privilege came great responsibility, and he felt responsible for finding a solution to this problem. There must be something I can do, he insisted. I have jewelry and valuable things in my room. Could I sell them to get the money for Emma's medicine? Marcus was amazed by the prince's generous offer, but he shook his head. Your Highness, those items belong to the royal family, not to you personally. You cannot sell them without permission, and if you asked for permission, you would have to explain why you needed the money. That would bring us back to the same problem. Alexander spent the next few minutes thinking hard about possible solutions. He considered asking his mother for help, but he knew she would want to know why he needed the money, and that would expose Marcus's situation. He thought about sneaking into the treasury, but he had no idea where it was or how to get inside. What if I gave you some of my allowance? Alexander suggested hopefully. Your allowance is probably a few silver coins each week, Marcus replied gently. It would take many years to accumulate enough money, and Emma does not have that much time. The prince fell silent, feeling the weight of helplessness for the first time in his life. He had always believed that being a prince meant having the power to fix problems and help people, but now he was discovering that even royalty had limitations. "How much time does Emma have?" Alexander asked quietly. Marcus's expression grew darker. "The doctor says that without the medicine she might not survive the next few weeks. Her breathing gets worse every day and she is becoming too weak to eat." Hearing this timeline made Alexander feel panic rising in his chest. This was not a problem that could be solved slowly or carefully. Emma needed help immediately, and every day of delay brought her closer to death. "I have to see her," Alexander announced suddenly. "What?" Marcus asked, startled by this unexpected declaration. "I need to meet Emma," the prince explained. "If I'm going to help her, I should know who she is. Maybe seeing her will help me think of a solution." Marcus looked terrified by this suggestion. "Your Highness, that is impossible. You cannot leave the palace without guards and approval from your parents. And even if you could, Emma lives in the village where it would not be safe for you to go." But Alexander had already made up his mind. "I sneak around the palace all the time without anyone knowing," he said matter-of-factly. "I know secret passages and hidden doors that even the guards do not know about. I could get out of the palace and come back without anyone missing me." Marcus realized that the prince was serious about this dangerous plan. "Your Highness, if something happened to you while you were trying to help my daughter, I would never forgive myself. The king would have me executed, and rightfully so. I cannot allow you to put yourself at risk for our sake." "But if I do not take risks, then Emma will die," Alexander replied with logic that was hard to argue against. "Is her life not worth some risk?" Marcus found himself in an impossible position. On one hand, he was deeply moved by the prince's willingness to endanger himself for a child he had never met. On the other hand, he knew that allowing the prince to leave the palace would be the most serious crime he could possibly commit. "Your Highness," Marcus said carefully, "even if you could safely leave the palace and visit Emma, how would that solve the problem of getting money for her medicine?" Alexander had been thinking about this question during their entire conversation. "Sometimes adults cannot see solutions that children can see," he said wisely. "Maybe there is an answer that we have not thought of yet, but I will never find it sitting in the palace." Marcus looked at this remarkable 8-year-old boy and felt amazed by his determination and compassion. In his 10 years of working at the palace, he had seen many members of the royal family, but none of them had ever shown such genuine concern for ordinary people. "If I were to consider such a plan," Marcus said slowly, "it would have to be completely secret. No one could ever know that you left the palace or that I helped you. The consequences would be too severe for both of us." Alexander nodded eagerly. "I understand. This will be our secret. But I promise you, Marcus, I will find a way to save Emma. She is not going to die while I have the power to help her." Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes again. But this time they were tears of hope rather than despair. For the first time since Emma had become sick, he felt like maybe, just maybe, there might be a solution to their impossible situation. 3 days passed before Alexander found the perfect opportunity to execute his plan. During this time, he spent every free moment thinking about Emma and observing the palace routines more carefully than ever before. He studied the guard rotations, the servants' schedules, and the times when certain areas of the palace were empty. The prince also began asking innocent questions about the village during his lessons. His geography tutor was pleased by Alexander's sudden interest in the kingdom's settlements and happily provided detailed information about the roads, houses, and people who lived beyond the palace walls. On the chosen day, Alexander waited until his afternoon rest period, when he was expected to remain quietly in his chambers. His personal servant always used this time to attend to laundry and other duties, leaving the prince alone for at least 2 hours. This would give him enough time to leave the palace, visit Emma, and return before anyone noticed his absence. Alexander had discovered the secret passage 2 months earlier while exploring the palace. Behind a large tapestry in an unused storage room, there was a narrow stone stairway that led down to an old tunnel. The tunnel had probably been built long ago as an escape route during times of war, but now it was forgotten and covered with dust and spider webs. The prince had explored this tunnel several times and knew that it emerged in a grove of trees about half a mile from the palace walls. From there, it was only a short walk to the village where Marcus lived with his mother-in-law and Emma. Before leaving his room, Alexander changed out of his royal clothing and put on simple brown pants and a plain shirt that belonged to one of the servant boys. He had borrowed these clothes earlier and hidden them in his wardrobe. With his royal garments removed and his hair messed up, he looked like any other village child. The journey through the tunnel was more frightening in the afternoon shadows than it had been during his previous explorations. Strange sounds echoed off the stone walls, and the prince had to feel his way through several sections where his small candle provided barely enough light to see. But his determination to meet Emma kept him moving forward despite his fear. When Alexander emerged from the tunnel, the fresh air and sunshine felt wonderful after the musty underground passage. He carefully covered the tunnel entrance with branches and leaves, then set off toward the village. Marcus had given him detailed directions to the small cottage where Emma lived. The village was unlike anything Alexander had ever experienced. The houses were much smaller than the servants' quarters in the palace, and many of them looked old and in need of repair. Children played in the dusty streets with simple toys made from sticks and stones, wearing clothes that had been patched many times. Alexander had never seen poverty before, and it shocked him to realize that people lived so differently from his own family. He began to understand why 200 gold coins represented such an impossible amount of money for Marcus. These people clearly struggled to afford basic necessities like food and clothing. Following Marcus's directions, Alexander found the cottage at the end of a narrow lane. It was tiny compared to the palace, with only 2 rooms and a small garden where a few vegetables grew. Smoke was rising from the chimney, and he could see warm light glowing through the single window. The prince approached the door nervously, suddenly realizing that he had not planned what he would say to Emma's grandmother. He could not reveal his true identity, but he also needed to explain why he wanted to visit Emma. After thinking for a moment, he decided to say that he was a friend of her father from the palace. When Alexander knocked on the wooden door, it was opened by an elderly woman with kind eyes and gray hair tied back in a simple bun. She looked surprised to see a strange child at her door, but her expression was welcoming rather than suspicious. "Hello, young man," she said gently. "Can I help you with something?" "My name is Alex," the prince said, using a shortened version of his real name. "I work at the palace with Marcus, and he told me about Emma. I wanted to visit her if that would be all right." The grandmother's face brightened at the mention of Marcus. "How wonderful that Marcus has made a young friend at the palace. Emma will be so excited to meet you. She loves hearing about the palace, and she has been asking her father to bring home stories about the people who work there." As they walked into the cottage, Alexander was struck by how different it felt from the palace. Everything was small and simple, but it felt warm and cozy in a way that the grand palace rooms never did. The furniture was old but well cared for, and there were handmade decorations that showed the love and creativity of the people who lived there. "Emma, dear," the grandmother called softly toward the back room. "You have a visitor. A young friend of your father's has come to see you." Alexander heard a weak but excited voice respond from the bedroom. "Really? Someone came to visit me?" When the prince entered Emma's room, his heart immediately broke. The little girl was lying in a small bed, surrounded by pillows to help her breathe more easily. Her face was pale and thin, and Alexander could hear the difficult, labored sound of her breathing. But despite her obvious illness, Emma's eyes were bright with curiosity and joy. "Hello," Emma said with a smile that made Alexander feel both happy and sad at the same time. "Are you really my father's friend from the palace? What is it like to work there? Have you seen the prince?" Alexander sat down carefully on the edge of the bed, amazed by Emma's enthusiasm despite her condition. "Yes, I work at the palace," he said truthfully, "and I have seen the prince. He is a nice boy who cares about people." Emma's eyes grew wide with excitement. "Really? What does he look like?"
Is he very fancy and important?
"Does he wear a crown all the time?" The prince found himself in the strange position of describing himself to someone who had no idea who he really was. "He looks like a normal boy," Alexander said honestly. "He does not wear a crown very often, and he likes to learn about different people and places. I think he would like you very much if he met you." "I would love to meet the prince someday," Emma said wistfully. "But my grandmother says that people like us do not get to meet royalty. She says they live in a completely different world from ours." Alexander felt uncomfortable hearing this, knowing that Emma was actually meeting royalty at that very moment. But she could never know it. "Maybe the worlds are not as different as people think," he suggested carefully. For the next hour, Alexander listened as Emma talked about her dreams and interests. Despite her illness, she was curious about everything and had a beautiful imagination. She showed him drawings she had made of flowers and butterflies, explaining that she hoped to see real ones in the palace gardens someday. When it was time for Alexander to leave, Emma grabbed his hand with her small, weak fingers. "Will you tell the prince about me?" she asked hopefully. "Will you tell him that there is a little girl in the village who thinks about him and hopes he is happy?" Alexander felt tears forming in his eyes as he promised Emma that he would definitely tell the prince about her. As he walked back toward the palace through the tunnel, his mind was racing with new determination. Meeting Emma had changed everything for him, and he knew exactly what he needed to do. The next morning, Alexander woke up with a sense of purpose unlike anything he had ever felt before. Meeting Emma had shown him that being a prince was not just about wearing fine clothes and attending formal ceremonies. True royalty meant using his position to help people who could not help themselves. After his morning lessons, Alexander went looking for Marcus. He found the guard at his usual post near the main entrance to the palace. Marcus looked surprised and nervous when he saw the prince approaching, glancing around to make sure no one was watching them. "Your Highness," Marcus whispered, "you should not be seen talking to me. People will ask questions. Meet me in the old storage room behind the kitchen in 1 hour," Alexander whispered back. "I have important news about Emma." Marcus's face filled with worry and hope at the same time. He nodded quickly and returned to his duties, while Alexander walked away as casually as possible. An hour later, the two met in the dusty storage room where their first conversation had taken place 3 days earlier. Marcus looked anxious and exhausted as if he had not been sleeping well. "Your Highness, please tell me you did not actually go to see Emma," Marcus said immediately. "I have been worried sick thinking about the danger you might have put yourself in." Alexander smiled reassuringly. "I was perfectly safe and Emma is wonderful. She is exactly the kind of person a prince should care about protecting. But Marcus, her condition is worse than you described. We need to get her medicine immediately." Marcus nodded sadly. "She gets weaker every day. Last night she could barely eat anything, and her breathing was so difficult that she could not sleep. I do not think she has much time left." The prince took a deep breath before making his announcement. "I have decided to tell my father about Emma's situation. I am going to ask him directly for the money to buy her medicine." Marcus looked terrified by this plan. "Your Highness, no. You promised that you would keep this secret. If the king learns that I have been discussing my personal problems with you, he will think I was trying to manipulate you or use your kindness for my own benefit. But I am the one who chose to get involved," Alexander protested. "You did not ask me for help. I offered it because it was the right thing to do." "That does not matter," Marcus replied desperately. "The king will see it as a failure of boundaries and protocol. He will blame me for not maintaining proper distance between myself and the royal family. I will lose my job, and then I will have no way to pay for any of Emma's care." Alexander had not considered this possibility, and it frustrated him to learn about yet another rule that seemed designed to prevent good things from happening. "Then what do you suggest?" he asked.
"Should we just let Emma die because of protocol?"
Marcus was quiet for several long moments, clearly struggling with an internal conflict. Finally, he looked up at the prince with an expression of desperate determination. "There is one possibility," Marcus said slowly, "but it would require you to trust me completely, and it would mean taking a significant risk." "Tell me," Alexander said immediately. "There is a wealthy merchant in the capital city who owes me a favor from many years ago," Marcus explained. "Before I became a palace guard, I saved his life during a robbery. He told me that if I ever needed anything, I should come to him." Alexander listened intently as Marcus continued. "If I could travel to the capital city and find this merchant, he might be willing to lend me the money for Emma's medicine. But I cannot leave my post at the palace without permission, and I cannot explain why I need to go without revealing Emma's situation." "How can I help?" the prince asked. Marcus hesitated before answering. "If you could create a distraction that would require additional guards in another part of the palace, I might be able to slip away for a day without being missed. But this would mean asking you to misbehave or cause trouble, which goes against everything you have been taught." Alexander considered this request carefully. His entire life he had been taught to be obedient, polite, and well-behaved. The idea of deliberately causing problems went against every lesson he had learned about proper princely conduct. What kind of distraction would you need? He asked. Something that would make the head of security move several guards from their regular posts to deal with an emergency, Marcus explained. It would need to seem serious but not actually dangerous to anyone. The prince spent several minutes thinking about possibilities. Finally, he smiled as an idea came to him. What if someone reported seeing suspicious strangers in the palace gardens? That would require guards to search the entire grounds, and it would take them away from the interior posts. Marcus looked impressed by the prince's suggestion. That could work, but you would need to be very careful about how you reported it. You could not be caught lying or you would face serious consequences. I will not lie, Alexander said firmly. I will tell the truth, but I will be creative about how I tell it. The next part of their plan required precise timing. Marcus would need to leave the palace early in the morning and travel to the capital city by horse. If he rode hard and everything went smoothly, he could meet with the merchant, get the money, purchase the medicine, and return to the palace before his absence was discovered. This plan depends on many things going perfectly, Marcus warned. If any part of it fails, we will both face serious trouble. Emma is worth the risk, Alexander replied without hesitation. Besides, what is the point of being a prince if I cannot use my position to help people who need it? Marcus felt overwhelmed by the prince's courage and generosity. Your Highness, I do not know how to thank you for what you are doing. Most people in your position would never take such risks for someone they barely know. Emma is not someone I barely know, Alexander corrected him. She is my friend, and friends help each other when they are in trouble. They spent the next hour working out the details of their plan. Alexander would wait until the following morning, then report seeing mysterious figures in the gardens during his early walk. This would cause the guards to conduct a thorough search of the grounds, providing Marcus with the opportunity to slip away unnoticed. Remember, Marcus said as they prepared to leave the storage room, once we begin this plan, there will be no turning back. Are you absolutely certain you want to take this risk? Alexander thought about Emma lying in her small bed, struggling to breathe and dreaming of seeing the palace gardens. He thought about her drawings of flowers and her hope that the prince might be happy. Most of all, he thought about the promise he had made to himself to save her life. I have never been more certain of anything, the prince replied with complete conviction. Tomorrow morning we will begin saving Emma's life. Alexander barely slept that night, his mind racing with thoughts about the plan and worries about everything that could go wrong. When the first light of dawn appeared through his bedroom window, he was already dressed and ready to begin the most important day of his young life. The prince made his way to the palace gardens earlier than usual, taking care to be seen by several servants who could later confirm his presence there. He walked slowly through the carefully maintained flower beds and hedge mazes, actually hoping to spot some real strangers so that his report would be completely truthful. As fate would have it, Alexander did see two figures moving near the far wall of the garden. They turned out to be gardeners who had arrived early to tend to some delicate plants, but from a distance in the dim morning light, they could easily be mistaken for intruders. This gave the prince the perfect opportunity to make his report without lying. Alexander hurried back to the palace and found Captain Reynolds, the head of palace security, just as the man was beginning his morning rounds. Captain Reynolds, the prince called out, trying to keep his voice calm despite his racing heart. Your Highness, Captain Reynolds replied with a respectful bow. You're up very early this morning. Is everything all right? I was walking in the gardens and saw some people moving near the far wall, Alexander reported truthfully. They did not look like our usual gardeners, and they seemed to be examining the wall very carefully. I thought you should know about it. Captain Reynolds immediately became alert and serious. Security of the palace grounds was his primary responsibility, and any report of suspicious activity required immediate investigation. Can you describe these individuals, Your Highness? How many were there, and what exactly were they doing? Alexander provided accurate details about what he had seen, describing the two figures and their location near the wall. He was careful not to add any false information, but he also did not mention that he had recognized them as gardeners from their tools and clothing. Thank you for this report. Your Highness, Captain Reynolds said gravely, please return to the palace immediately while we investigate this matter. If there are intruders on the grounds, we need to ensure your safety above all else. Within minutes, Captain Reynolds had assembled a team of guards and begun organizing a systematic search of the entire garden area. Alexander watched from his bedroom window as guards spread out across the grounds, checking every bush, tree, and building. As planned, this operation required most of the palace guards, including Marcus, to leave their regular posts. The prince waited anxiously as the search continued for over an hour. Eventually, the guards discovered that the suspicious figures were indeed gardeners who had arrived early for their work. Captain Reynolds was slightly embarrassed by the false alarm, but he praised Alexander for being vigilant and reporting what he had seen. "It is always better to be safe than sorry," the captain told the prince later. "You did exactly the right thing by reporting suspicious activity. A good prince always puts the safety of the palace first." While the search was taking place, Marcus had successfully slipped away from the palace using a service entrance that was temporarily unguarded. He rode one of the horses from the royal stables, knowing that this unauthorized use would be discovered eventually, but hoping he could return before anyone noticed the missing animal. The journey to the capital city normally took most of a day, but Marcus pushed his horse hard and arrived at the merchant's shop by mid-afternoon. Finding the merchant took longer than expected, as the man had moved his business to a different location since Marcus had last seen him. When Marcus finally located his old friend, the merchant was surprised but delighted to see him. The merchant, whose name was Thomas, remembered clearly how Marcus had saved his life years earlier by fighting off 3 robbers who had attacked his cart on a lonely road. "Marcus, my friend," Thomas exclaimed, embracing the guard warmly. "What brings you to the capital? Are you still working at the royal palace?" Marcus quickly explained Emma's situation and his desperate need for money to buy her medicine. He was honest about his circumstances and acknowledged that he had no way to repay such a large loan in the immediate future. Thomas listened carefully to Marcus's story, his expression growing more serious as he understood the gravity of the situation. 200 gold coins is indeed a substantial sum," he said thoughtfully. "But you saved my life, and the life of a child is worth far more than money." Without hesitation, Thomas went to his strongbox and counted out exactly 200 gold coins. "Take this money and save your daughter," he said, pressing the heavy bag into Marcus's hands. "Do not worry about repaying me quickly. When you are able, you can return the money, but Emma's health is more important than any debt." Marcus felt tears of gratitude streaming down his face as he accepted the money. "Thomas, I cannot express how much this means to me. You are saving my daughter's life." "You saved mine first," Thomas replied simply. "This is just returning the favor." Marcus immediately took the money to the medical supplier that the village doctor had recommended. The medicine was exactly as expensive as expected, but Marcus now had enough gold to purchase a full course of treatment for Emma. The supplier carefully packaged the precious medicine and provided detailed instructions for its use. By late afternoon, Marcus was riding back toward the palace as fast as his tired horse could carry them both. He knew that his absence would soon be discovered if it had not been already, and he needed to return before facing questions he could not answer. As evening approached, Marcus reached the village and stopped at his cottage to deliver the medicine to Emma. His daughter was weaker than she had been just 2 days earlier, but her face lit up with joy when she saw her father. "Papa," Emma whispered, "Alex came to visit me yesterday. He works at the palace with you, and he told me about the prince. He said the prince is a kind boy who would like me." Marcus smiled, knowing that Emma had actually met the prince himself, though she would never know it. "Alex is a very special person," he agreed. "And yes, I think the prince would like you very much." Marcus carefully administered the first dose of medicine to Emma, following the supplier's instructions exactly. Within hours, her breathing seemed slightly easier, and she was able to eat a small meal without difficulty. "Is this the medicine that will make me better?" Emma asked hopefully. "Yes, sweetheart," Marcus replied, stroking her hair gently. "This medicine will help you get strong again. Soon you will be able to play outside and maybe even visit those palace gardens you have always wanted to see." Emma smiled sleepily as the medicine began to take effect. For the first time in months, she fell into a peaceful, restful sleep without coughing or struggling to breathe. Marcus knew he had to return to the palace immediately, but he took a moment to watch his daughter sleep peacefully. Thanks to the courage and kindness of an 8-year-old prince, Emma now had a real chance to survive and grow up healthy. Marcus returned to the palace just as the evening guard rotation was beginning. His heart was pounding as he approached the main entrance. knowing that his unauthorized absence might have been discovered. To his relief, the confusion caused by the morning search had disrupted the normal schedule enough that his absence had not been noticed by most of the staff. However, Captain Reynolds was conducting a thorough review of all security procedures following the false alarm in the gardens. When he reached Marcus's post, he found it empty and immediately began investigating where the guard had gone. "Has anyone seen Marcus today?" Captain Reynolds asked the other guards. "His post was unmanned during the garden search, and I need to account for all personnel." One of the guards mentioned seeing Marcus near the stables earlier in the day, but no one could provide a clear explanation for his whereabouts during the security operation. Captain Reynolds made a note to speak with Marcus as soon as possible. When Marcus finally reported to Captain Reynolds' office, he had prepared a careful explanation. "Sir, I apologize for my absence during the search," he said respectfully. "I was feeling unwell this morning and stepped away from my post to visit the palace physician. The medicine he gave me made me drowsy, and I rested in an unused room until I felt well enough to return to duty." Captain Reynolds studied Marcus carefully, noting that the guard did indeed look tired and stressed. "You should have reported your illness through proper channels," he said sternly. "Leaving your post without authorization is a serious violation of protocol." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. "I understand, and it will not happen again. I take full responsibility for my error in judgment." After considering the matter, Captain Reynolds decided to issue a formal reprimand rather than more severe punishment. Marcus's record had been spotless for 10 years, and the captain believed that everyone deserved some consideration for personal emergencies. Meanwhile, Alexander was waiting anxiously in his chambers, wondering whether Marcus had been successful in his mission. The prince had spent the entire day worrying about his friend and trying to act normally around his tutors and servants. That evening, as Alexander was preparing for bed, he noticed a small piece of paper that had been slipped under his door. He opened it carefully and found a brief message written in Marcus's handwriting. "The mission was successful. Emma is receiving her medicine. Thank you for everything, Your Highness." Alexander felt a wave of relief and joy wash over him. For the first time since meeting Marcus, he was able to sleep peacefully, knowing that Emma would have the chance to recover from her illness. Over the following weeks, Alexander found excuses to check on Marcus's well-being during their brief encounters in the palace corridors. Marcus always gave him subtle signals that Emma was improving, and the prince could see the difference in the guard's demeanor. The constant worry and sadness had been replaced by hope and gratitude. 1 month after their daring plan, Alexander decided to make another secret visit to see Emma. Using the same tunnel and disguise as before, he made his way to the cottage in the village. The transformation in Emma was remarkable. Her color had returned, her breathing was clear and easy, and she was sitting up in bed drawing pictures when Alexander arrived. She greeted him with enthusiasm and energy that had been completely absent during his previous visit. "Alex," Emma exclaimed happily, "I am so much better now. The medicine my father brought me has made me strong again. Look, I drew a picture of the palace gardens based on the stories you told me." Alexander examined Emma's drawing, which showed beautiful flowers, tall trees, and a small figure that was supposed to represent the prince. "This is wonderful, Emma," he said sincerely. "You are a very talented artist. My father says that when I am completely well, I might be able to visit the real palace gardens," Emma said hopefully. "Do you think that could really happen?" Alexander smiled, already planning how he could make this dream come true. "I think anything is possible when people care about each other and work together," he replied. During his visit, Alexander learned that Emma's recovery had been even more successful than the doctors had expected. The medicine had not only stopped the progression of her illness, but had actually reversed much of the damage to her lungs. Emma would need to continue taking the medicine for several more months, but her prognosis was excellent. As Alexander prepared to leave, Emma grabbed his hand, just as she had during his first visit. "Alex, I want to give you something," she said, handing him a small drawing. "This is a picture of a prince and a guard working together to help people. My father told me a story about how the prince at our palace cares about everyone in the kingdom, even people like us." Alexander looked at the drawing, which showed 2 figures standing side by side, one wearing a crown and the other in a guard's uniform. Between them was a small house with a family standing in front of it, all smiling. At the bottom, Emma had written in careful letters, "Thank you for caring about us." The prince felt tears forming in his eyes as he accepted this precious gift. "Emma, this is the most beautiful drawing I have ever seen," he said truthfully. "I will treasure it always." 3 months later, during a sunny afternoon in spring, Alexander convinced his mother to allow him to invite some children from the village to visit the palace gardens for a special celebration. He explained that he wanted to learn more about the kingdom by meeting young people from different backgrounds. Queen Isabella was pleased by her son's interest in connecting with their subjects and approved the plan. Among the children invited was Emma, who was now completely healthy and excited beyond words to finally see the palace she had dreamed about for so long. When Emma arrived at the palace gardens with her father, she was overwhelmed by the beauty of the flowers, fountains, and carefully maintained pathways. Marcus, dressed in his formal guard uniform, watched proudly as his daughter explored the gardens with wonder and joy. Alexander, wearing his finest prince clothes for the first time in Emma's presence, approached them both. "Welcome to the palace," he said formally to Emma, then added with a warm smile, "I have been looking forward to meeting you." Emma curtsied politely, having practiced this greeting many times with her grandmother. "Thank you, Your Highness," she said shyly. "I am honored to be here." As the afternoon progressed, Alexander and Emma walked through the gardens together, with Marcus following at a respectful distance. Emma pointed out all the flowers and birds she had only heard about in stories, while Alexander shared interesting facts about the palace and its history. "Your Highness," Emma said during a quiet moment, "I feel like I have met you before. You remind me of someone very kind who visited me when I was sick." Alexander smiled mysteriously. "Perhaps we have met in dreams," he suggested playfully. "Sometimes the most important meetings happen in ways we do not expect." As the sun began to set and the village children prepared to return home, Emma approached Alexander one final time. "Your Highness, thank you for inviting me to see your gardens. They are even more beautiful than I imagined, and thank you for caring about people like my father and me." Alexander took Emma's hand and spoke words that would be remembered in the palace for years to come. "Emma, a kingdom is only as strong as the kindness shown to its people. Your father protects us every day, and you remind us what we are protecting. You both make our kingdom better just by being part of it." The other adults present, including Queen Isabella, were deeply moved by the prince's words and his obvious genuine care for these village guests. Marcus felt proud beyond measure to serve a royal family that could produce such a compassionate future king. As Emma and Marcus walked home that evening, both of them carried memories that would last forever. Marcus knew that his daughter's life had been saved not just by medicine, but by the extraordinary kindness of a young prince who understood that true nobility came from helping others. Alexander returned to his chambers that night and placed Emma's drawing in a place of honor on his desk. Every time he looked at it, he was reminded that being a prince meant using his privileges to make life better for everyone in his kingdom, especially those who needed help the most. Years later, when Alexander became king, he would often tell the story of Marcus and Emma to remind his advisors that the strength of a kingdom lay not in its wealth or power, but in how well it cared for all of its people. And in the village, Emma grew up to become a teacher who told children stories about a young prince who proved that kindness was the most important quality any leader could possess.